All right, this was a bit of a surprise appearing out of nowhere last year, and here we are right now. We've sat down and we've actually played a good little 10-15 minutes of the return of Shadow of the Beast. And I'm joined by the man that made it all happen, Matt. I think you're a little bit excited, a little bit scared, would that be correct?
Yeah, I think a combination of both of those. It's been, we've been sitting in a room for a year and a half staring at this and wondering whether we're doing the right thing. And, it's such a personal experience for us because this really is taking something that was so important to me, a formative experience, and turning it into a game that hopefully other people will enjoy and get that same sort of excitement and inspiration from that I got when I was a kid. So yeah, big moment for me at the moment.
Well, let's talk right back at the start. How, in the presentation you mentioned obviously what a huge fan you were of the original game, but how does this get connected up with making this version of the game? How did this all start?
Yeah, I mean, a long time ago when I played the original, I was quite young, 16-ish. I'll leave you to do the maths on how old I am now, but it had one of those big experiences of changing the way I perceived games, and only a few games have really had that moment for me, and this was one of them, because I imagined a world once I'd left the screen behind, and that was something that made me realize this is as powerful as film or book. And fast forward a few years, and I went to visit XDev to talk about some projects that I could potentially do with my newly formed studio. And they were in the old Psygnosis building, and it was a great moment to walk through those doors. And once we were upstairs and we were talking through the game ideas, and they asked me, well, if you could choose anything, what would you do? And I said, well, there is this game, and you guys bought Psygnosis. Would you be interested in hearing my thoughts on Shadow of the Beast? And they were open to it, and they let me, I guess, sort of just channel my 16-year-old self and explain the whole game. And they said, this sounds really interesting, develop this concept, talk to us more. And it was, dream come true.
So did you come in with like a pitch formed in your head, or was it almost like just on the spot of anything? Well,
Well, I came in with a set of pitches for different games that we could work on with the team size that we were. And when they sort of left me that open question, I'd sort of realized, I knew it was the Psygnosis building, and I know Shadow of the Beast was published from there. And it was, I'd always had it in my head because I've been thinking about it for so long. And so when they opened it up, I sort of went, well, and just sort of let it flow out of me. And it was very rough and not particularly formed at that stage. But yeah, they humoured me, listened to me, and let me go away and develop it. And were happy to listen to me. And when I started to talk about the hopefully unique game ideas and gameplay that we could do to make sure that something for a modern gamer was really relevant and really interesting. And and now we're here.
Because it's almost like the best proper time for this game to reappear, because you imagine if they tried to resurrect this 10-15 years ago, they'd be looking for like 3D world, and would completely detract from what the original game was all about. And what you've created is very much keeping to those iconic tones of the original. Yeah. So how did you go? Did you have, right, we have to make sure it's 2D, we have to make sure there's certain things you have to hit? What were those themes?
Yeah, well, I mean, we were quite passionate about it. I mean, a lot of people say, we realise that fans, but we are fans as well. This is really important to us. And there are things from the original that really resonated with me that we don't really see in modern gaming too much. Being able to just deal with hundreds of enemies, in huge, quick succession. You get through, a minute of gameplay and you've killed, an enemy every second. That's the kind of thing that you don't really get to see in modern games too much. Short of, just pingy enemies. And we wanted to make sure that was something we could do, but also we wanted to sort of steer away from the sort of 3D style view, because then otherwise to get that through that many enemies you'd just end up with a big sea of enemies with axes hovering in the air, and that's all you'd see of the world. And Beast is a lot about the environment and that world being something beautiful to engage with.
Like you said during the presentation, it's almost like there's a whole separate story going on in the world itself where you're questioning how these things have come about.
Yeah. I mean, that's something we really wanted to make sure that players could get from the experience. So having this sort of huge, these two things of super fast combat, something that was really engaging and frenetic, and hopefully gives people a very good sense of empowerment, combined with something that was really beautiful and hopefully inspirational, and sort of the juxtaposition between that sort of brutality and the beauty of the world was something that we felt really important and iconic about the series. And Sony have been really supportive. The great thing is that we've also been able to play with that formula, so hopefully on some of the other levels you'll see that we sort of play around with what 2D could mean, hopefully.
Well, sort of talk to us about, for your game, the story, and what's the arc there?
So we took the inspiration from the original story, which you probably only get if you read the manual. It's very much about Arboron as a character, and we've really tried to explore what he meant to us and what he means to us now. He's a character who was taken by the main protagonist, Malatoth, as a baby, and twisted into this killing machine. And early on in the experience that we have here, I don't want to spoil too much, but he has an emotional moment which is written in the original manual as witnessing the death of his father, that makes him resolve to go after the person who's committed these atrocities against him. And we're trying to explore sort of some darker themes and riff on that. So I don't want to spoil it too much, but we're staying true to the very core of the story, but doing something which hopefully will mean that players can get quite an interesting set of developments from it, because it's quite dark when you sort of drill into the details of childs being abducted when they were young and being forced to do things. There's some interesting themes to explore, and hopefully we get to do a bit of that in the game.
Well, can you talk about the demo that you're showing here today? As you said, it's the first time anyone's really seeing it. So what little chunk of gameplay are players getting to experience?
So with the demo today, we really wanted to get across a lot of the core basics of the game. We've customized it slightly because it's a new audience, but this is sort of a mid-game point in reality. And we wanted to make sure that people got a chance to really see that huge swathes of enemies that you could get through, and the way that sort of engaged you. And that's something that we really wanted to focus on. We also wanted to give you a glimpse of the world that we've created, and hopefully, anybody who plays it walks away with a few questions about why some of these things have happened. Because
from what we played, there's a little bit of platforming in there. There's a lot of combat, and what's quite nice is the combat system is quite in depth with block moves, evade, counter strikes, but it all pulls off very, very smoothly, which is really nice to see. How did you go about sort of building in this elaborate combat system?
Yeah, that's been probably the main focus of our efforts, really, is to, from a gameplay point of view, is how do we create this sort of experience that you don't see in modern games, and well, now you do, and make sure that it's got the sort of rich and depth that comes from, hopefully what players like to experience when they want to get involved with the world. So we've been trying very carefully to balance all these different aspects. You've got to use block carefully. You've got to use, later on, some of the enemies require you to think quite carefully about the order you tackle them. But all of this is to feed in towards this rage mode where Arboron really gets a chance to explode and give players this really sort of ever-increasing pressure of delivering moves quickly, but it can kill any enemy. So it gives you a real sort of incentive to play well, because you get this great payoff of unleashing the the rage of Arbron.
Well, what we tried there, certainly on the sort of lower level minions, it was a case of just timing those button presses correctly to sort of chain the moves between different enemies. But then we had that sort of mid-tier boss where it seemed a bit more elaborate. Can you sort of dig into that?
Yeah, we want to make sure that enemies don't just feel, like an endless stream of inconsequential guys. So we have sort of some accent enemies who try and ask different things from you as a player. I mean, the guy that you played in this demo, he'll take the first hit, you give him a first hit, but then he knows that, well, you're going to hit me, so I'm not going to attack you until you lower your guard. So you've got to sort of have a slightly more elaborate face-off. And again, we didn't explain anything to do with that in the game, and it's been really interesting just to watch people play it and sort of have those moments where they're sitting there with guard and he's just sitting there waiting for you, and there's that people letting go and then suddenly realizing he will attack, and then the realization that actually I can be clever with this and lure him into attacking me and then getting my move in. And we want to try and make sure that there are these moments that sort of test the boundaries of what on the surface looks like quite a simple combat system.
Can you talk about the music of the game? Who's composing this? What sort of theme are you trying to generate with the music?
We know the music is such an important part of Shadow of the Beast. I mean, to us it's important, and we've had so many emails, and it's been really great to see people so engaged with it. So we know that the music's very important, and we're hopefully going to be able to talk more about that at a later point. But we know it's important, and we're hopefully going to not disappoint people.
Well, it's pre-alpha at the moment, but when can people expect to play this? I mean, have you got a ballpark figure, even a year?
We're really just pushing as hard as we can to get it done, and Sony have been super supportive in giving us the time to get the ideas as correct as we can, and so quite when that will result in the game coming out, I'm not sure, but all I can say really is that we're pushing as hard as we can to get the experience to the level that hopefully won't disappoint people when they play it.
Thanks very much for taking the time to talk to us.
I really appreciate it, genuinely. Thank you very much, and thanks for anybody watching for actually listening to me ramble.